It is estimated that the number of drug users in Africa alone could rise by as much as 40% by 2030. Yesterday marked the International Day Against Substance Abuse and Illicit Drug Trafficking under the theme Share Facts on Drugs, Save Lives. To take this discussion further and understanding the severe impacts and ways of dealing with substance abuse, we are now joined via Zoom by Shaun Shelly, who is the chair of the South African Network for People Who Use Drugs. Shaun, thanks so much for giving us your time here on SABC News. We appreciate it. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and thank you. I appreciate it as well.
Yeah. You know, yesterday we had one of our reporters, Vusi Kumalo, who was out talking to people who are drug addicts or taking drugs. And what I found quite interesting during some of the conversations he was having with them was that for the most part they blamed, their lifestyles and their choices on, those they surrounded themselves with, those that they associated themselves with. And often, I do note that there is some sort of lack of accountability when it comes to drug users. Why is this the case? Is it linked to shame? Is it linked to denial? Perhaps you have better perspective on this issue.
Well, yes, I would say it's linked to criminalization and stigma, very much so, because what happens is once people start using a drug, which is often something that happens with people who are in adolescence, in the more rebellious phase of their life or more experimental phase. For some people, that takes hold because it's got added meaning due to their circumstances. And as soon as they get caught or found out to be using drugs, they're either criminalized and put into jail or stigmatized and excluded from family things. And that drives further drug use and leaves them with a community of other drug users to mix with. They're not integrated into communities. The more we exclude people from the community, the more psychosocial dislocation they're going to feel and the more importance they're going to place on their drug use and the drug using identity.
And in fact, Shaun, that's something that I wanted to talk to you about. I mean, this issue of criminalizing and, sending to jail, shutting the doors. I mean, it obviously just creates more of that sort of cycle. Surely there are other ways in which we can deal with the issue of drug users and those that find themselves in this vicious cycle. Obviously, there's the big guys, the drug dealers, who obviously must then be, put in jail, I suppose. But when it comes to, a young guy who's, perhaps experimenting with, I don't know, dagga or whatever it is that the best way to deal with the situation, to kind of send them to jail, lock up? What other ways and means are there with dealing with this? I know there's rehab and so forth, but what other ways can we talk about to kind of deal with the issue of drug users?
Well, we know that if you've got two people who are exactly the same and one of them gets caught for using drugs, and the other one is still using drugs but doesn't get caught, the one who's caught in his adolescence is far more likely to have contact with the criminal justice system in the future. And that tells us that our interventions at the moment are actually causing more harm than doing nothing at all, which is a sad state of affairs. So the things that we can do is we must realize that often adolescents are experimenting. When you've got very young people using drugs, it's usually a societal problem, not a drug problem. It's the fact that parents, for economic reasons, can't be present with their children, perhaps. We've got families that are struggling to survive economically, little hope in the future. So when you get young people using drugs, we've got to find more supportive mechanisms. And in fact, an alternative for today is called the Support Don't Punish Day, which is an international campaign to try and get support for people who use drugs so that they don't have to become excluded from society and go to jail.
Yeah.
We also know that early intervention works well and prevention works well in terms of accepting that people are going to experiment, but you need to make them feel secure and a part of the community for that not to progress into problematic drug use.
Yeah, I see that, with yesterday marking International Day Against Substance Abuse and Illicit Drug Trafficking, the theme that's being used is Share Facts on Drugs, Save Lives. How is this being done? I mean, I always find that it's nice to have these tagging themes or hashtags, whatever it is, but, I always want to know how exactly that theme is actually being used and how it's practically being done. I mean, how are we sharing those facts on drugs and indeed then essentially sharing, saving lives as the theme says?
Unfortunately, a lot of the information out there about drugs is just incorrect. And I understand that some people are nervous about sharing sort of more moderate facts about drugs or sharing where the real dangers lie in drugs because they're scared that perhaps people will think it's not that bad. But in actual fact, what we're trying to do as SANPUD and organizations such as TB Care and the University of Pretoria is get facts out there that are going to help people not develop problems with drugs, and for people who are using drugs to understand what is really dangerous and what is not. People see other people using cannabis, they think, okay, that's fine, and then they take synthetic cannabinoids, which are not fine, which are very, very dangerous because they don't have the facts. So we need to get those facts out there, and we've got some campaigns that we're busy using to try and get them out and counter the false narratives.
Obviously, there's many families who are dealing with, having members in the family who are, struggling with drug addiction. I mean, one can obviously, we know it's well documented, the sort of destruction and frustration and stress of having someone, who suffers from addiction in people's families and communities. What are those families and communities supposed to do at that point? Because, you're kind of stuck in a difficult situation. It's either you throw the person out, which is actually a worse situation because you're leaving them out, throwing them to the wolves essentially, or you try and find ways and means to help them through the process. I wonder what advice you give to those families who are dealing with issues of having drug addicts within their own families.
So first of all, is not to panic and don't get confrontational. We know that doesn't work and that it can drive the situation further.
Yeah.
Also, it's important to have your own boundaries. Don't accept stealing from the family, that kind of thing. But also make the person feel welcome and respond positively to the good things that they do. And the question I always ask people is find out why they're using drugs. What do they get out of it? And it's not because they're addicted, but why? What is it that makes drugs so important to them? And often it comes down to things of lack of hope, lack of integration with other peers and other people who aren't using drugs, and lack of opportunity for the future, a lot of fear. And if we can talk to people and then provide them the support that they need and alternatives to drug use, then we'll find that people will start using drugs less often and less dependently and less problematically.
All right, Shaun, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for giving us that information. Much appreciated.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.